On the morning of the 22nd of June, 1942, a Polikarpov, Potu, biplane lifted off from a rough airfield near the Caucasus Mountains. To any observer on the ground, it looked more like a relic from the First World War than a weapon of the Ba. Second, made entirely of wood and canvas, with an open cockpit and a top speed of only 90 miles per hour. This slow, fragile machine should never have posed a threat to anything. Yet, as the sun set that evening, German soldiers along the Eastern Front trembled at the sound of these biplanes. They were flown by women, an all-female unit that would become known as the Night Witches. And their story is not one of luck or overwhelming force, but of ingenuity, courage, and the utter failure of everyone who underestimated them. The wooden biplane you're about to learn about shouldn't have existed as a weapon at all. The Polikarpov Po-2 was designed in 1927 as a training aircraft, a simple two-seater for teaching novice pilots the basics of flight. Some were used for crop dusting. It had no armor plating, no self-sealing fuel tanks, and no defensive weapons. If a tracer bullet struck its canvas fuselage, it could ignite in seconds. By 1942, it was desperately out of date. When the Soviet Air Force's lower-tier pilots received their aircraft assignments, the Po-2 was what the least experienced flyers got the plane. Nobody else wanted. But those pilots were not men, they were women. And for 3 years, they would prove that underestimating them was the deadliest mistake the Nazi war machine could make. The story begins in the autumn of 1941, when Germany had just invaded the Soviet Union. The Red Army was bleeding. Millions of soldiers were being killed, wounded, or captured. The air was thick with Luftwaffe fighters. And yet, when thousands of Soviet women volunteered to fly combat missions, they were rejected. The official reason was that women had no place in the military. The truth was more complicated. Soviet ideology celebrated women as workers and mothers, but not soldiers. Prejudice against female combat flyers was as strong in Moscow as it was in Berlin. One woman refused to accept that answer. Marina Raskova was not an average pilot. She held long-distance flight records. She had survived 9 days in the frozen wilderness after parachuting from a record-breaking flight. When Stalin rose to power, he admired her celebrity and her defiance. In the summer of 1941, women who had been rejected from the Air Force began writing to Raskova, begging her to help them. Raskova collected those letters, walked into Stalin's office, and told him that if women could bleed for the Soviet Union on the ground, they could bleed for IT in the air. Stalin listened. He ordered the creation of 3 female-only aviation regiments. 1 would fly fighters, 1 would fly bombers, and 1 would fly night bombing missions in fragile trainers. By the end of 1941, more than 2,000 women had applied. Only 400 were selected for each unit. They were girls, some as young as 17, many only 19 or 20. They had come from flight clubs, from universities, from dreams of becoming pilots before the war made that dream possible. They assembled at an aviation school near Stalingrad. The best pilots went to the fighter regiment. The worst, by design, went to the night bombing unit. They were handed Po-2 biplanes and told to learn to kill with them. The training was brutal. What normally took months to learn had to be compressed into weeks. These young women had to master navigation by compass and map alone. No radios, no instruments. They learned to fly in darkness, to find targets they could not see, to drop bombs with precision from a plane that handled like a farm truck. They discovered that in freezing weather, if they put a bare hand on the fuselage, their skin would stick to the metal. The cockpits were open to the elements. They had no parachutes. Parachutes added weight, and weight mattered in a plane that could barely stay airborne. If they crashed, if they were shot down, the only way out was on the ground, running, or a bullet. They carried pistols for that purpose. The women packed extra ammunition in case they had to choose. By the 1st of June, 1942, the night bombing regiment was ready. They flew. Their first combat mission on the 3rd of June. A few scattered bombs dropped on German positions near the Caucasus. The Germans did not think much of it. How could they? They were being attacked by planes that moved at walking speed. German pursuit. Fighters could outrun them by 4 times. German anti-aircraft guns could cut them to pieces. On paper, the night bombing regiment should have been wiped out before the end of the month. But the German pilots and gunners did not understand what they were facing. The women had figured something out. If you flew so low and so slowly, if you shut off your engine as you approached the target, you became a ghost. The Po-2 was made of wood and canvas, materials that did not show up on German radar. The engine noise, when it cut off, sounded like the whisper of a broomstick sweeping the air. The Germans called them Nachthexen, night witches. The first time one of these sorties worked was the moment everything changed. A formation of 3 Po-2s would approach a German position. The first 2 would come in with engines roaring, drawing the searchlights and anti-aircraft fire. The gunners would lock onto the noise, the light. Then the 3rd plane, the real bomber, would approach in silence with its engine off, gliding through the darkness above. When the first 2 planes scattered, drawing fire away, the 3rd would be precisely over the target, a nudge of the Tacris control stick, 2 light bombs falling. Then the engine roars to life, and the pilot pulls hard on the stick to climb away into darkness. By the time the Germans realized what had happened, the biplane was gone. They began flying multiple sorties per night, 6, 10, 18, the surviving records. Sometimes claim that individual pilots flew as many as 14 or 16 in a single night. After each run, they would return to a field cleared that very day, lit only by torches, held by ground crew women frantically refueling and reloading for the next flight. The women who worked the ground were the same women who flew the planes. There was no separation of labor. The pilot would land, jump out while the engine was still running, and the navigator would take over, helping the ground crew swap out bombs. 10 minutes later, they would be airborne again. The Po-2 could carry only 2 bombs. Each weighed 110 pounds. Against a heavy tank or a fortified bunker, 2 small bombs were nearly useless. But the night witches were not trying to destroy individual targets. They were trying to break the will of soldiers who could not sleep. For 3 years, they attacked every night. Not the same. Targets always, sometimes supply lines, sometimes artillery positions, sometimes ammunition depots, sometimes when the bombs froze in their racks from the brutal cold. A navigator would climb out onto the wing in mid-flight and hit them with a wrench until they fell free. They were terrifying not because of the damage they dealt, but because of the constancy, the psychological grinding of night after night of attack, of never knowing when the sound of a broomstick in the sky meant death was coming. By December of 1942, the unit was given the Guards designation. They became the 46th Taman Guards Night Bomber Aviation Regiment, named after the peninsula where they had fought and won. Of the initial women who had been assigned to the unit, the ones deemed least skilled enough for the night bombing role they had become the most highly decorated pilots in all of the Soviet Air Force. The numbers tell the story. From June 1942 to October 1945, the Night Witches flew approximately 23,672 combat sorties. They logged 28,678 flight hours. They dropped over 3,000 tons of bombs and 26,000 incendiary shells. They damaged or destroyed 17 river crossings, 9 railways, 2 railway stations, 26 warehouses, 12 fuel depots, 176 armored cars, 86 prepared firing positions, and 11 searchlights. They made 155 supply drops to Soviet forces. These statistics would be impressive for a regiment of experienced male pilots flying modern fighters, for a unit of young women flying 1928 training planes at night under fire, without radios, without parachutes. They are staggering. The cost was 30 women killed in action. The weight of those losses falls heavy when you learn the age of the dead. Olga Sanfirova was 19. Irina Volkova was 18. Valentina Bereschenko was 17. Some of the night witches were old enough to have been their mothers, now in their early 20s. When a plane was shot down, when a biplane came apart in the sky, or crashed burning into the earth, there was no rescue. The 2 women inside did not come back. The whole regiment grieved. Then flew another sortie. Yet of the 89 women who served in the regiment over its 3-year operation, 23 were awarded the Hero of the Soviet Union, the highest military honor. Compared to the fighter and bomber regiments, this was unprecedented recognition. The male leadership, initially skeptical, had become believers. These women were not mascots or propaganda pieces. They were combat pilots. Some among them became as decorated and skilled as the very best male aviators in the Soviet Air Force. One night in the war, a senior German officer made an observation in his diary. A Luftwaffe pilot had been awarded the Iron Cross for shooting down a single Po-2. Think about that for a moment. The Germans thought so little of these planes that they gave their fighter pilots a gold decoration for destroying one slow biplane flown by women. That medal stands as proof of something the Germans could never quite admit, that these women terrified them. The war ended on the 7th of May, 1945. On the 4th of May, the night witches had flown a mission within 60 kilometers of Berlin. They were fighting until the very end. But when the victory parade came, when Moscow celebrated the defeat of Nazi Germany, the night witches were not invited. Some sources say they were excluded because their planes were too slow. Others claim the Soviet leadership did not want women to believe they could have permanent roles in the military. After all, that these women had given their youth, their lives, their skill in the darkness, the moment of collective triumph was denied to them. It was a betrayal that would echo forward. For decades, the story of the night witches would be forgotten. In the Soviet Union, their story was suppressed. In the West, it was unknown. They were not the famous male pilots who made headlines. They were women who had done the impossible and then been told their story did not matter. Most of them lived out their lives in obscurity, occasionally meeting with each other in secret, remembering the war, remembering their friends who did not come home, and wondering why the world had forgotten them so quickly. But some stories refuse to die. In recent years, through books and documentaries and the common, persistent voices of the surviving night witches themselves, the world has begun to remember. These were not exceptional women performing above their abilities. These were ordinary women given an extraordinary circumstance. They were told they were not good enough, not brave enough, not strong enough. Every single day, their own good government, their allies, their enemies, told them they did not belong in the cockpit. And every single night, they strapped themselves into a biplane made of wood and canvas, and they flew into the darkness to prove that everyone was wrong. That is why we remember them, not for the tons of bombs dropped, not for the targets destroyed, not for the medals earned. We remember them because they refused to accept the world as it was told to them. The next time you hear the word impossible, think of a 19-year-old girl, cold enough to lose feeling in her hands, flying a plane so slow that a man on a bicycle could almost outrun it, heading toward anti-aircraft fire and searchlights and enemy fighters. Think of her, because she was not thinking of glory. She was thinking of her mission. She was thinking of the soldiers on the ground who might sleep tonight because she flew. She was thinking of her friends and of home, and of the simple fact that she was strong enough to do what was asked. That strength is what the Germans called the night witches. It is why we call them heroes. Now, what do you think? Were the night witches simply lucky, or did they succeed through pure skill and determination? And here is the deeper question. How many other stories like theirs have we forgotten? How many women served in ways we will never know? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If you loved learning about these women who changed the course of aviation history, hit that subscribe button. We have new stories from the world wars every week, and each one reveals the voices that history tried to silence. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.